Well,
Take two.
Okay.
on the road.
Erev Tov. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for a special evening with Eleanor Jack here. I'm Iftach. I'm the Shaliach here in Federation, here with my wife, which is actually, this whole initiative is actually her.
Oh, that's who I thank? Yes. Thank you. Okay.
And this is a special evening. It's called Zikaron Basalon, as most of you know, and I want to say a couple of words about that. And then, of course, we'll hear Eleanor. Zikaron Basalon is a tradition from 2011 in Israel, which basically, and now just for you to understand, there's thousands. This evening is Erev Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day for Holocaust in Israel. So thousands of living rooms like this had taken place already. Now they're asleep in Israel, with I think more than 1 million people participating. And the whole idea, I would say, in Israel, and there's a lot of Israelis here, some Americans, Israelis, is to the remembrance of Holocaust has changed over years, and education about Holocaust, and the question, how do we remember? What do we do with these stories? And there's a shift between having these mass assemblies into more intimate conversations, hearing stories from people that we might have not even had a chance to hear. And in that sense, each living room is very, very special. This is a one-time place, and we're all in a small journey together this evening. That is kind of the idea. I'll say thank you for a moment because this is not easy. It's not, it's informal in a way, and anybody can still have a drink and have a pizza, and Eleanor is super funny, so we can laugh and we can cry, and everything is fine.
Not really.
You see what I mean? But first of all, personal thank you from us to share the story. It's not easy to get you to speak like
I
it's.
don't want to do this, to be honest with you.
Intimidating in a way.
But for my parents, that's why I'm doing it.
And of course to the entire family. And I want to say, who is a Folby, Curhan, or Jackie here? Please raise hand.
Raise your hand. You're from the bloodline.
So as you can see, we have a big portion of the family, which is this almost like, first time really like hearing some of these stories? Is that?
I don't know, from me maybe, but I think from Bubby. Didn't Bubby share some things with you? Is that?
I mean,
you're too young.
I think it would be more like directly one-on-one, or like on walks or something like that, but not in a formal or somewhat of a formal sitting.
I don't do well with that.
And of course we have a lot of other people, Israelis and locals, and we have our Shinshiniot here, so a great mixture. And another thing that it's important to say, and again, why for me it's personally important. I didn't get to know a lot about my family story. Some of them came to Israel before the war and after. And the Holocaust is a complex story. And we tend to think that the stories that we're going to hear is like Auschwitz, all the things that we and usually a lot of times when you ask people that have been through, that period of time, they say, what do I have to tell, right? What is my story? I haven't been to. But there is a lot of story to tell. And there's a lot of these small puzzles that help us understand where our family came from. What is our connection? Why is this so important for American Jewry and for Israelis as well? So we're kind of gathering the pieces of the story by doing that. The way we are going to have this evening is we're gonna hear the story from Eleanor, and then we will have a short discussion and see. First of all, you'll have, of course, an option to ask questions, and then we'll talk about Holocaust remembrance. The theme of this whole idea is, what is it to remember today? What is our role as another generation? What does it mean? So think about that, and we will end with a special project and a song that we will see on the television screen. I want to thank the Holocaust Memorial Center. Ruth Bergman, the educational director of the Holocaust Memorial Center, is here with us. She'll say a couple of words. It's the first time that we also cooperated. Last year we had one session. Now we have a couple over Metro Detroit happening, so we're excited. Not tonight, but in the next week. So thank you for coming, and
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. So I'm Ruth Bergman, and I'm the Director of Education at the Zekelman Holocaust Center. I am the child of Holocaust survivors, and my mother was actually a pioneer in Holocaust education. She wove her personal story into the history that she taught, transforming facts and figures into a deeply human story. Real people who suffered horribly simply because of who they were, and real people who were lucky enough to survive and go on to build remarkable lives. In Holocaust education, we call that technique teaching the human story. Not that 6 million people died, but that 6 million times an individual human was murdered. Whole communities disappeared, and a culture and a way of life were destroyed. So as many of you know, and some of you might not, we at the Holocaust Center are redesigning our core exhibit. And one of our main goals is to tell the story of the Holocaust through the testimonies of the people who lived through it. So for example, when we talk about what the Nazis did, the Nuremberg laws, we also provide the voices of the people who lived through it. What it was like to have to change schools, hand in your radios or your bicycles, lose your livelihood. Survivor voices are in every part of our new exhibit, from pre-war Jewish life all the way to the very last section, where they call upon us to do better, to be better, and to make the world better. My parents, like many survivors, are no longer with us. My father died in 2012, and my mother died this past August. We know that we won't have survivor speakers to tell their stories for much longer. So we have developed what we call the Next Generation program. And actually, we're now signing people up for the third cohort, so come talk to me. And the idea is to train children and grandchildren to tell their parents' story and also their own. Growing up in the home of a survivor, the lessons you learned, the trauma that you saw, the experience, what that connection is. And in this way, we, the children and the grandchildren, can continue to tell the personal stories of our loved ones, and we become a link in that chain of Holocaust memory. Our student and adult groups tell us how deeply moved they are by hearing these speakers, and the speakers have described the training and speaking experience as transformative. We can't change the past, but by learning about the past, hopefully we can make a better future. As the children and grandchildren of survivors and victims, we can go into the world and make a positive difference and be that role model for others. Zachor is an action word. It's not just keeping the stories in our heads and hearts, but telling the stories to every generation. That's what you're doing here tonight, and that's our mission at the Zekelman Holocaust Center, to engage, educate, and empower others by remembering the Holocaust. So thank you for all being here and for our ability to be a part of this program with you.
Thank you.
All right.
Sue, the daughter.
Take it away, the daughter. I feel like we're on Fiddler on the Roof. Okay, this is supposed to be informal, not so stiff, so everyone relax, have something to drink, to eat. If you need to get up, please don't worry about making any noise. Exactly. Exactly. Good one. How we're relaxing. My mom's gonna get going, but I wanna say, this is, I mean, a lot of people don't like to speak publicly for sure. My mom really doesn't like it. In a small room, telling stories, she's a great schmoozer. To be something like this, In a small group too, you're good.
Not really.
Here we go.
Mother daughter.
Yeah. So I will say, this took a lot, so I really want to say how grateful we are.
Thank you.
Getting emotional. I think on behalf of all of us siblings.
I am emotional now.
And kids,
I watched
right.
the tape so long. Yeah, go ahead.
And try and tell your story, and the fact that you don't even believe that you're a survivor
No.
says
But
a
I
lot.
mean, because I don't know that.
Well,
I
but
do.
it's in there, it's a story, and we all will come to unpack all this. But thank you all for coming and to hear my mom's story. A lot of people don't know a lot about it. My mom's kind of revisiting and relearning, which is really hard. So thank you very much. We love you. We're supporting you. And wherever you go, just little vignettes. Just tell the story. Doesn't have to be
Where do I
chronological.
start from
Well, you were
19
born in
Okay,
1940,
fine.
and
Okay,
there,
I'll start from
and
there.
take it away.
Bobby, you got this.
So about
Don't worry.
82 years, okay, how long? Okay.
Just look at me.
Hmm?
Just look at me.
I'll go look at you. Okay, sweetie pie. Let's see, I was born July 7th, 1940, and the war broke out in Baranovich in the winter of 1941. I watched the video a little bit, that's why I'm a little emotional. So, my dad was a tailor. My mother came with 9 children that were there. Each one she was the second youngest. And each of her brothers and sisters had 4 to 5 children. And my mother had my brother, who was 4 years older than I was. And they had a really nice life. And then when the Germans came in, they came in like overnight. They didn't expect this at all. And overnight, their town, Baranovich, was being bombed, and they were set on fire. And my dad was a fireman. And he worked 24 hours and he was off 48 hours because that's when the Russians took over that little area. And he had to go into the work as a fireman. And he was a tailor, but when my family was there before the Russians took over, he had his own business. He had a nice family. Everyone was happy because the president of Poland was very good to the Jews, because the Jews saved his life. So everyone was happy. No one thought they'd have to leave, and then he died. And then I don't remember what year, they said about a year and a half before the war started, the Russians took over that area. And so they took all the businesses away. And and they told my dad he'd have to go work as a fireman because he had to give up his business. So he did, and he was on 24 hours, and 48 hours he was off. So he went and got himself a small sewing machine, and he would work for himself. But when they came in overnight, my mother, my mother's family didn't want to leave because it was so nice there. They didn't believe that this could happen to them. So my mother's mother didn't want to leave. Her brothers and sisters family didn't want to go, but my dad wanted to go, and he wouldn't leave because my mother wanted to stay with her family, so they stayed. And then when the war broke out, everyone was running, even my grandmother, everyone was running because everything was set on fire. The bombs were coming down, and at those times they were running on foot, and with nothing, they couldn't take anything out of the house. And then when a truck driver saw my mother with my 4-year-old brother and myself in her arms running, he said, "Why don't you come in the truck and I'll take you?" And she went with him because my dad was still at the fire department, and then he couldn't leave. He ran out and got into another truck, and then they all evacuated. They tried. And then they stopped somewhere outside of their area. And my brother saw my dad in the other truck and said, Papa, Papa. Oh, I'm gonna cry. So, I shouldn't have watched tapes. So, shouldn't have. So, my mother didn't see my dad, but my brother did. So he jumped out of the truck and he went and he said, okay, my mother said, as long as we're together, I don't care if we die, but we're together. So, one truck took off, and then my mother was in this truck in the front because of me, and then my dad was supposed to put my brother in the back of the truck. And before he could do that, the truck took off. So my mother thinks that my brother and my mother are in the back of the truck, and they're not. So about an hour or two later, she gets out looking for them. She says, she asked everybody, where's Shmuel? Where's my son? They said, well, the truck took off before he could get on the truck. So that was the end. That's 5 years. So then my mother was in the woods with they were all escaping. She said there were so many bodies and dead bodies wherever they were going because of the bombs so she ended up in the woods with this a huge group of people with me, and she didn't have enough milk for me because I was about 7 months old. And about a month or two later, I mean, you know, as you're running, I'm crying because I'm very hungry, and I'm crying, and the whoever was taking them that had the guns said to her, you know, we can't have her. We have to take her from you because she's going to give us all away. They were hiding. And she said, but that's my daughter, and she got hysterical, and they were going to say, well, you know what, if you can't get her quiet, we're taking her. So another partisan who was a little bit above him said, how can you treat her that way? Her baby is crying. He says, you can't treat her like that. So he took a cube of sugar, and he tore a piece of his white shirt, and he put the cube of sugar in and put it in my mouth. And then I was quiet. He kept me quiet till it was nighttime so they could take off again. Now that's part of the story. And then they ended up in, I forgot what other towns. And she escaped with this other woman who was in the fire department with my dad, who was also Jewish. There were only 2 Jewish people, also with my dad. And they were together wherever they ended up. And they eventually ended up in Tashkent, which is like 2,300 miles. I don't know how long it took them. And this woman wouldn't leave my mother alone because my mother several times wanted to commit suicide because she didn't know what to do. She didn't know what her family was about. She didn't know where her husband. She didn't know about her son. When she ended up in Tashkent, she ended up working in a store or something, like a factory where they made clothes. So she was a seamstress, and they had a quota, and she didn't have the time to take care of me, so she put me into an orphanage. And then she would come and visit me, I don't know, every few days, I don't know. And then she said that I was so sick that I had to be hospitalized a few times because I ended up being malnutritioned. I had this, what do they have under your stomach is full, and then your legs, and then your legs are...
You had rickets.
Rickets, that's what I thought, it was rickets. Also malnourished with the, yeah.
And then she thought to herself, I don't know if I can take this anymore. She said, you know, but thank God for this woman. She kept telling her, I'm by your side. I'll take care of her. I'll do whatever you need to do. And then she came to see me. She said, you know, I have to live because if I don't live, my daughter's not going to. So that's part of that. Now, I don't know where else to go. So anyway.
So then where was Zeta at this time?
Okay, Zeta, okay. My dad ended up getting in another truck, and then he was taken into these working camps outside of Baranovich and in Minsk. Oh, so when that happened, I'm sorry, I'm jumping. My dad had to take when the trucks took off and he had my brother, my dad thought maybe he'll go to Minsk because it wasn't as bad there as it was in Baranovich. So he walked 25 miles with my brother on his shoulder to get to Minsk. And then when he got there, he worked a little bit. He did what he had to do to get food. And then he realized it's getting bad there. He's going to go back to Baranovich where they had a ghetto. They had a 2-block ghetto in Baranovich where they put all the Jews. And he ended up going back there. And he went with my mother's family. There were 25 of them in this little room like this size. And because he was a fireman, he was able to get out and get food because they would give him food because he was back in Baranovich, so he was back in the fire department. And he'd come back, and they were like in a bunker underneath this building. They were in the bunker. And every time he'd come back and bring them bread or something, there were a few less. And he said by the time, I don't know, about a month later or something, he said my grandmother and my brother were the only 2 out of 25 that were still not taken and killed. They would take them into the woods and dig graves and just shoot them, because in Baranovich, that area, they didn't take you to concentration camps. They took you, they marched you to the woods, they dug deep graves, and they would shoot you, and you just fall in the grave and they left it. So when my dad, there were only the 2 of them, and when he went back, or he came back to put some food into the bunker, he realized that they were taken. So he asked the neighbors what happened. They said, well, they came in, my mother's girlfriend's friend told them. So they went, they took them into the field. They showed them exactly where they were killed and where they were buried, and it was horrible. So, how can I go back? My mother's, in their home before the Germans came, had a wonderful life, and her best friend, who was Jewish, was dating a German boy who was thinking about converting. He loved this girl. They came over to my mother's, and he learned Yiddish and did all that. But when the Nazis came, he became a Nazi, and that's where he would let them know where all of the people were hiding. Mm-hmm. So then my dad was taken, but they put him in a working camp because he was a tailor. And he sewed uniforms for this general, and he had permission to go to his home, and he was sewing uniforms, and then I don't know, he worked at 2 different camps. I don't know, he told me that I watched today, it was like 2-3 different camps, but they kept him alive because he was always making uniforms for officers, but he couldn't touch them because he was Jewish. So he had to look at them, figure out what their size was, and then make the suit. And it always fit, so they really, and then, oh my God, I heard so many stuff. So, okay, I'm gonna shorten this. So anyways, he was in a couple of working camps, and they kept him, he was in the line to get killed. I mean, taken, not a concentration camp, but to take him into the fields 4 times, which I didn't know till today. And then every time that he was getting closer, the general who he was sewing uniforms for saw him and said, hey, we need him, he needs to sew us the clothes, and so he saved him. And then by the 4th time he was there, they beat him so badly. He had a leather coat that he was not finished yet for this general, and he was getting close, and then the general noticed him with his coat and said, what are you doing? And he said, no, we need him, get him out of the line. So he was saved 4 times. He can't believe it. And then after that, they told him that as the war was getting closer and they were starting to kill everyone, he went, the fortune teller, okay, back up. Yeah. I forgot the main thing. When he was in one of these camps, the fortune teller told him,
How the fortune teller came.
gypsies. They had a room.
Gypsies.
Go ahead, yeah.
No, you go.
At that time, they had a lot of Jews killed already, so now they're going after the gypsies. And he was in a room with about 20 workers, in a room half the size, and then they brought in 10 more people that they were going to shoot. And one gypsy looked at my dad, a man, and kept looking at him out of all these people, and he kept staring at him. He says, can I talk to you? He goes, yeah. He said, so he sat next to him. He says, give me your hand. He says, what for? I mean, what do you want my hand for? He says, I want to look at it. So he looked at his hand. He was a fortune teller. And he looked at his hand, and he said to him, you're going to live, you're going to make it, but it's going to be very, very hard. He said, you're gonna escape from here. So my dad says, well, how am I gonna escape from here? There's all kinds of electrical wires. I can't escape from here. He says, you're gonna escape from here. He said, and then you're gonna join the partisan. You're gonna be in the Russian army. You're gonna get wounded, but you're gonna find your wife. He said to him, you have a wife and you have a child. I don't know if the child's a boy or a girl, but you're going to find your wife and you're gonna find your child. They're somewhere in deep, I guess they were in Asia, in deep eastern Tashkent. So my dad said, what are you talking about? This is crazy. How can I leave? I'm not going anywhere. It's cold, it's this. He said, you know what? Wait a couple of months till it warms up and try and do what you have to do. So my dad in his head said, you know, he's up until the end, he kept hearing his voice saying, you're gonna make it. So he waited a couple of months till it got warm. And then he took a coat to the general, so he had a pass. He was able to go. He dropped off what he had to do, the suit. And then instead of going back, he hid in town, and there was woods outside of town, and then he ended up going out into the woods by himself. So the woman says to him, the interviewer, well, what did you eat? So he said, well, he didn't know how to say it in English, berries. He lived on berries, and then he said he used to find camps that the soldiers were at, the Germans, and then after they left scraps. He said he used to eat potatoes, whatever he could find. And then about 2 weeks later, he heard about 12 men talking, and they were and so he said, you know what, I got it. And he heard that they can get beaten up, but he said, you know what, I don't care, I'm starving, whatever happens, happens. He went out, and he told the men his story, and they let him join the partisan. Mm-hmm. And so what he did was, they taught him to, they made bombs, they taught him to run and put it on the railroad tracks, do whatever he had to do. And he did that. And then they heard that the Germans were coming back, and so they said, run. So they all ran separately. And then he joined this, what was it? I forgot what he joined, that they kept him, they said, you're a spy. Oh, he bumped into Russians, and they said, you're the only Jew, you're a spy. He said, I'm not a spy. Where are the other men? He said, what? We all ran. I mean, So then they took him, and that's when he was in those little things. And then how do I say it? And then he went for, it's all broken up. But anyways, he ended up going back to Minsk. And then he went back to Baranovich, and they said to him, you have to join the Russian army, because he was part of the fire. He went back to the fire station. We know that you're okay, but you have to go and join the Russian army. So he didn't have a choice, so he joined the Russian army. And the woman says to him, well, did they treat you differently because you were a Jew, the interviewer? He said, no. He said, but they put me in the front lines. So they didn't put me in the back of the line, they put me in the front. So he was there for about a week or so. He got wounded. He got hit in the leg. He said his whole leg was gone. So they took him to a hospital, and they fixed his leg, and he was on crutches. And then he went back to Baranovich, and he found a boyfriend of his on crutches. They took him back to Baranovich, because by then I guess the Russians were taking over land, and so Baranovich was freer. So he went back to Baranovich, and he found an old school friend who was also a fireman, and they were talking, and then he said to him, I'm going back my wife is back in Tashkent, out east somewhere, out east, he said, and there's a friend of hers that says that maybe she knows your wife.
This is after the war then? Or
No, no, this
during
is
the
still,
war?
the war is still going on, but it's like, he said, I think there's a, you know, cause people were starting to write notes back and forth, because Wranovic was already okay, Minsk was, I think, was okay, but there was still little pockets. And he said, well, I don't know. He says, I never heard from my wife, you know, this is what my dad is saying, I never heard from my family. So he said, well, I'm gonna meet her, and we're gonna meet together, and she says she has a picture. I'll go to see her. I'll see what the picture is. So he met her, and he knew my mother from them being being working together in the fire department. He went, he saw the picture, he said, oh my God, that's Shana. So he took the picture back to my dad and said, this is Shana. Now he didn't recognize me because I was older already. This is Shana and your daughter. He says, oh, he said, where are they? He said, well, they're in, this woman knows, my wife's friend knows exactly where she is. So he went on crutches, and it took him a long time. He said the trains were not running regularly, but because he was handicapped, he was wounded, they gave him a special pass. He could get it. People were nice, they let him get on the train because it was crazy. It was crazy. So it took him a long time to get there. Then when he got there, he started to show her pictures to people when he got off the train. And
This is how many years later now?
God, I don't know.
5 years later?
44. I mean, I'm just giving you fast. I
No,
can't
so
tell you.
4 or
probably.
5 years later.
Yeah, this is 1944, 45. Yeah,
It
it
took him 2 months to get
yeah,
to Tesh.
yeah. But it was like 44.
Okay.
And then he went, so he saw this one boy about 17 and saying, do you know of anyone by name Kudowitsky? He said, no. Well, he showed her pictures. Oh, I recognize her. I know where she is. He said, she's over there somewhere. So he went over there in that area, and he saw this long line, bread line, and he's showing people my mother's picture. And my mother hears this voice. She looks up, and it's my dad. She passes out. And she wasn't with me then. I wasn't there then because I was still in that orphanage where she stuck me. She passed out, and so the woman says, well, how did you feel? She said, well, how should I feel? I cried, you know. I mean, sometimes you gotta check your intuition, okay? I mean, common sense, a little common sense. How did you feel? Well, so, you know, they got together. How'd you feel? We hugged, we kissed, we cried. Okay. So then she took him to the orphanage for me to meet him. So I saw him, I ran away, and the woman there who helped my mother, because she was like a nurse there, and she took care of me when I was so sick all the time. And she tried to tell her, well, this is your papa, you should go with him. I don't want to go with him. But your mom, you know, go with your mother and go with your papa and you'll spend some time. So I left with them. And then we ended up going to, I forgot, there are 2 different displaced persons camp. I wrote it down, but I didn't bring it. So we were in Salzburg, and we were in, I forgot the other one.
Was it Vienna or something?
I don't know. So, well, that's it. Yeah. But there was one more, and then we were in Bagastein, Austria.
How many different displacements?
Well, Salzburg. You want to hear a story? I didn't know either. First time I saw it today. Salzburg is where he had like 3 different surgeries on his leg. He had such a bad wound. They couldn't fix it. So when they got to Salzburg, they had Dr. Goering, who was this German, who was in jail there.
In Austria?
German,
Yes, German,
in jail.
German.
The American found, they put him in jail there. But he was working in this hospital, and he's the one that worked on my dad's leg. A German who used to do these horrible things, worked on my dad's leg was fine. I mean, he did a great job on it. My dad was surprised, but he did a great job.
That's amazing.
Sure.
So we were there, I'm just jumping because it's just hard.
Right, when you were in the train and you were.
Oh,
trying
the
to go-
train went, well, that's when they were together already.
Right.
Now we wanted to leave and go as far, where do we want to go, as far east? Where's
West.
west, as far as west, where I end up, I don't even know, as far as west. Bogestein, okay, you're right, Austria. So we had to pretend that we were Greek Jews. So we couldn't speak Russian. So of course I was raised in an orphanage by Russians and Stalin is my father. I mean, I'm 5 years old. Every picture I saw, Stalin my father, Stalin my father. So we're at the train station and I take off and I see a big picture of Stalin and I'm standing there, Stalin my father, Stalin Russia, Stalin my father. Now my mother can't come and get me because there's a lot of other people with false papers. So she doesn't know what to do. So finally, and because there's soldiers with me, and I'm talking to them, with my mouth, I'm talking to them, I'm saying, Stalin, my father. And then finally they leave. My mother comes and grabs me and runs, because the train was ready to take off. I mean, it wasn't, so thank goodness I, kept my mom or whatever. So, so then we ended up in Bogestein, Austria, in a displaced persons camp. And it was, my mother said when my dad got there, he bought an old sewing machine and he started the little business. He would make a few rubles and do whatever he had to do. And then there were some American soldiers there, because it was an American displaced persons camp. It was, so they used to give food, she said, they used to give toys to the little kids, and they used to do a lot of things. And and they said to them, if you have any relatives in the United States, it doesn't matter if you know where they are, just let us know, we'll try and find them. So one soldier, my mother doesn't know his name, but he was a redhead, came over, he spoke Yiddish, and he said, do you have any family in America? She said, well, I have a brother and a sister, I don't know where they are. He said, that's okay, give me their names, and I'll have my family look for them. So he sent the family, my mother's family's name, because my mother's older brother left and her older sister left before the war in 1924 or 26. And they found my uncle. I mean, they put ads in all the Jewish newspapers all over the U.S. She didn't know where the U.S. So my uncle, a friend of my uncle saw the ad and told my uncle, but at that time he lived in Canada, in Windsor. Now he knew he couldn't bring them over, so he called my Aunt Helen and Meyer, Seymour's family. I didn't know this is new. Seymour's family, Meyer. His father had a factory in Chicago, a leather factory. And my uncle asked him, can you do me a favor? Can you sponsor them? Because I can't. I'll give you the money, whatever. So my mother got she got about 3 telegrams saying, don't move. We're gonna take care of you, but right now I'm in Canada. I have to find, the Americans to get you into America. Stay put, don't do anything. I'll take care of it. So a couple of months later, she got telegram saying, okay, it's taken care of. And we were put on an army barge to take us. And my mother said my dad was so seasick. Now by that time I'm 5. Well, I was almost 6. I spent my birthday on the boat. And my mother said, well, of course me, I'm always busy. My mother said, my daughter, who's 5 years old, used to run around up and down the boat, and she'd bring him oranges and grapefruits and food because he was so sick. Me, I went in the kitchen, I talked to them, and I got them food. And she said, oh, she's so good. So anyway, that's when she was happy with me. So, and then she said that she didn't know, my uncle didn't know what she looked like, because he left when she was a little girl. There's 17 years difference because my grandmother had so many children, and my mother was the second youngest. And when they got off the boat, and they got all their papers together and everything they have to do. When they went out, they said, look, there's a lot of people out there waiting for families. So you just go out there and, you know, look around, see if you can find them, whatever. So my mother, father, we all went out, and she said for some reason, she didn't look here, she didn't look there, she looked straight ahead, and she saw one person there that she couldn't take her eyes off of. And she just doesn't know what it was inside of her, but she thought, God, he looks like my mother. So she started going to him, like running to him, and he yells out, Shayna. I'm gonna cry. And then they hugged, they kissed, and my Auntie Helen was there, and Meyer, my uncle, my Uncle Archie had friends in New York, so they wanted to take us to a restaurant, to a nice restaurant in New York, because who knew from restaurants there and wherever we were. So he took us to a nice restaurant, and of course me. I was raised, see this table, on my legs, and in Asia, you ate with your hands. There was bowls, you ate from one bowl, and they would pass a bowl around, you go like this, with your fingers. And then they would pass a drink, and my mother said you have to drink from that same glass because it's an honor to the person who was giving it to you. I didn't know from silverware. So she said to me, it was unbelievable. I sat under the table in this nice restaurant in New York. I probably will still do that. In this nice restaurant in New York. And I didn't know, I ate with my hands. That's all I knew. She said everyone was, the family was giggling, they were laughing, it was so cute. It wasn't so cute. So it was so cute. And that's how we got here. Then my dad went to Chicago to see if he wanted to be in this factory, work in the factory. My dad never wanted to work in the factory. He wanted his own business. He always had his, always worked for himself. Then we ended up going to Detroit because my Uncle Windsor was very close. And my uncle found us an apartment on Linwood. And my mother said it was over an apartment on top over a beer garden. She called it in those days, beer garden. And there were cockroaches, but they didn't have the money. But she said the Jewish Federation gave him $14, and he opened up a tailor shop with the $14. In those days, I guess it went far. Opened up a tailor shop, and that's how it all started. And they both worked hard. My mother worked with him. She was a seamstress. That's what saved her life. And when she worked in this factory, and
They didn't want to talk too much about their story, though.
they never did.
Right. They didn't talk at all.
No, so the interviewer said to him, well, what do you want to say? He said, look, I don't know why I'm here. Shayna's whole family is gone, 25 people I saw with my own eyes, my son, he didn't, he said, why was I chosen? I'm not a tzaddik, which means I'm not a great man. I'm not smart. He didn't go, he was orphaned at 7. He lived by himself from 7 years old. And when he was 8 or 9, he worked in an uncle's tailor shop. He learned how to sew, and he took care of himself all that time. He knew my mother's family because they used to give him food, because he used to go from house to house and eat, because he was orphaned at 7. So, so my mother so they lived, so they started their shop. And see, I'm going all over the place.
Oh,
So you mentioned during the interview, he wasn't.
Oh yeah, so thank you, Jan.
Someone's listening.
Please, so thank you. So he said, I don't know why, he says, to this day, which was in 91 when he gave this interview, he said, I wake up every day, I can't stop thinking about this gypsy that read my palm. Because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have made it. Because that's the only thing that kept running in my head the whole time, is that you're gonna live, you're gonna find your family, and you're gonna live a long life. He said, that's the only thing. And he says, and thank God, look, I'm here. I have nightmares. He said, when we lived on Linwood, they had streetcars. He said, I wake up 3-4 times a night because of the noise that the streetcars made. He would scream because he thought it was the people were chasing him and all that, and it was horrible. But he said, look, you know what, you don't have a choice. And we have our friends, and I have a beautiful daughter, and I have a beautiful grandchildren, I have beautiful great-grandchildren. And he said, I have 2 more coming. I don't know who was coming at 91, 92. He said, I just want to live to see that. He said, I don't know how much longer I have. And he said, that was his life. And then my mother at the end of the videotape says, I want people to remember that never to forget that this can go on again. You never know. And she said, I tell my story because I want my children, my grandchildren, I want the family to understand how what we lived through, and that it shouldn't ever, don't let it ever happen again. I mean, it was, I shouldn't have watched it before I came here. No, sir, no, but I
Great job.
Thank you.
If you know our family, you know we're
You can
really
ask
superstitious,
questions.
and you'll know why we're superstitious. With vines and everything, it comes through the line.
Wow, so many.
Yeah.
Now,
Let's,
is there someplace that if they wanted to see it, they can see it?
I wanted to ask, what is that tape exactly you were talking
It's
about?
at the Holocaust Center. I think if you go online and you put Sam Kudowitz and Sonia Kudowitz, you can pick, because I saw it today on my iPad.
Through Portraits of Honor?
Is that what you?
Is it
Adam, do you know where
Portraits of
Sana
Honor?
sent? Yeah. Alana, you guys know.
Portraits of Honor? I don't know. Oh, Adam sent it to me. No, William sent it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so, because it's easier for us instead of, they gave us those DVD, those discs, and mine doesn't work, so